Hey everybody, I hope you're doing very well. So, I thought it was about time after a few requests that I finally do a video on my Boss Katana 100 head amp and how I use it. As I did before with my Roland Blues Cube amp, I thought I would split the topics of discussion and review for this particular piece of gear into a few different videos as opposed to one long one, because that would probably take me a very long time. So what I'm going to do is talk about how I, as a gigging guitarist, have used this amp in my rig before. I'm all too aware that as it stands there aren't any gigs happening right now, certainly not here in the UK, but recent news has come out, again here in the UK, that says we should be facing some form of normality by the 21st of June 2021. So with that in mind, it's probably worth considering getting your guitar rigs ready to get back out there. But for now, back to the topic of the video. In this particular episode about this amp, shall we say, I'll be talking about how I use it in a gigging situation, utilising the 4 programmable channels that you find on the top panel of this amp. And as I understand it, this has increased to 8 savable presets with the subsequent updates that the amp line has received. But the thing is, I haven't really used this amp in the past couple of years because I've transferred to using a Helix Live. But to be honest, having 4 savable tones was all I needed before, and you'll probably see why that's the case later on. What you will have heard on the intro, of course, were examples of the 4 tones that I have saved on the amp, ranging from clean on channel 1 to crunch on channel 2, what I've affectionately named smooth gain on channel 3, and brown on channel 4. The amp has cleverly squeezed 5 preamps into one box, the 5th being for electroacoustic guitars that you wish to plug in, and they all sound fantastic in my opinion. Apparently, these amp tones were developed by Boss during their time working on the high-end Wazacraft amplifiers, which seemed to me to be mainly in pursuit of achieving a rock or metal tone, but still having use in a wide variety of guitar-based genres. A great move by Boss, however, despite the Katana range's predecessor costing around £2,800 without a cab, was to make the Katana range incredibly affordable by comparison. I mean, almost anybody could afford one of these amps from the range on a cheap budget and still get a great gig-ready sound easily. I personally picked up my head amp for about 350 quid new, and it packs in a hell of a lot for that price. But let's get back to why this amp definitely walks the walk and doesn't just have fancy product descriptions and reasonable prices. Now, the observant among you will have spotted that I simply applied one of the 4 electric guitar amp tones to each of the savable channels. When I was first setting this amp up a few years ago, this seemed to be, to me at least, the most logical way to get the most tonal versatility out of the amp. By doing this, I had a huge range of gain and drive available to me, which was of course beneficial because I had a huge variety of music to play. But I did also want some consistency in terms of the volume and EQ aspects of the core amp tone. This would mainly be in aid of avoiding jarring the audience when I swap from a massively high gain sound to a clean sound, for example. With that in mind, let's just take a quick listen to each of the channels I have saved up, so you can listen out for the changes in gain, but the consistency in EQ and volume. Before I start with all that though, I'm just going to let those know who are curious. I'm running the amp at 50 watts through an orange PPC 1x12 closed-back cab loaded with a Celestion Vintage 30 speaker. And I've mic'd that as usual with a good old-fashioned Shure SM57, just 1 inch away from the grill and slightly off-center with the speaker cone. Let's take a listen. If you bear in mind that I wanted to use this amp live, it would of course be beneficial to swap between these amp channel settings with a Footswitch. This is where the ever-handy GAFC Footswitch comes into play, because not only will it allow me to change the amp channels on the fly, but it will also allow me to access control to the built-in amp effects. Now, you could do a whole video on the effects section and the accompanying software that goes with the amp, but for now, to keep things simple, I'm just going to talk about how I use a couple of the inbuilt effects to make this amp even more handy in a gig situation. First off, the solo boost. What I use to achieve this is really quite simple. I just chuck a clean boost in the sort of effects loop part of the chain, so it comes after the preamp of the amp. So the level increase is actually hitting the power amp part of the circuitry, which actually seems to have more of a drastic effect. It's not hitting the front of the preamp and therefore driving it harder, it's actually increasing the level. As you'll hopefully be able to see from the settings I have on screen, it's not really about adding more drive to the solo sound, it's really just raising the level so you can get above the band in that solo situation. And when I used to use this technique when I was out gigging with this amp, I used to back it up with the fact that I had a pedal board to further shape my tone instead of relying on the amp to have more forms of drive to add into the signal. So in summary, it was just really a convenient way to make sure my solos definitely got heard in the middle of a busy band mix. To see what I mean, check out the difference on this recording. Secondly, the delay. For me, this is a great way to make your clean ambient chords or roaring solos have some real atmosphere. All I'm using is just a simple crotchet or quarter note digital delay, the tempo of which can be altered by the GAFC foot switch or the tap switch that is also found on the top panel of the amp. Using a delay can go a long way to adding to your guitar sound, and personally I never do a gig without some sort of delay effect in my rig. In this particular case, I chose to use the digital delay, and that's just because it was my preference, but others may prefer something like the analog delay, which takes off a bit of the top end off the repeated signal, makes it sound a bit warmer and might interfere less with your sound overall. And using that can help if your sound is perhaps getting a little bit too busy. Anyway, here's my digital delay. And finally, an always-on mild hall reverb, which remains on with all the same settings on all of the channels. This offers a nice, subtle, different kind of ambience to the delay, while also assisting with the consistency between each of the amp channels. You see, if you use the same reverb throughout a set, for example, it will probably give the sense that the guitar has remained in the same natural space, despite jumping through different levels of gain and channels throughout the set. So that's going to be less jarring again for the audience. It could even be a bit easier to listen to as well. And just to include this for anyone who is actually interested in hearing it, I wanted to touch on the acoustic preamp that I mentioned earlier. The way I might have typically used this was to use the panel channel on the amp and dial in the appropriate settings for my acoustic guitar and the venue I was in, because of course that could drastically change from venue to venue, and it would mean having a completely different EQ or mix on the reverb, for example. Then once having dialed those settings in, I would just leave them on the top panel as you would do with any old amp. And in the meantime, I could just play electric guitar through one of the previously saved 4 channel slots available. Using the panel channel in this way meant that I suddenly, at the time, had a 5-channel, very handy and very versatile beast. Let's take a listen to it. Right, that about rounds it up for this video. I do hope that you've taken some useful information away from this, especially if you're one of those people that's sort of thinking about getting started with a gig-ready rig, but haven't necessarily thought about how you're going to get those gig-ready tones yet. Of course, with the pandemic beginning to wind down, it seems, this might be a topic that's swimming around in your heads a bit more often. If you do have any questions about the amp or the tones that I demoed in this video, then please do leave a comment down below and I'll do my best to answer them for you. Similarly, if you have any other topics or particular queries about this amp that you'd like me to cover in a future video, then comment down below and I'll see what I can rustle up. If you enjoyed this video, please remember to like and subscribe to the channel so you can catch any content like this, plus anything else that you'll no doubt enjoy. And another reminder just to say that I'm still taking bookings for online one-on-one guitar tuition, so you can get in touch with me about that on my socials, which, as always, are linked below. In the meantime, folks, stay safe out there, stay positive, and stay musical.